You come home to your fish tank after a hard day at work, or maybe you're out on the weekend hanging out with some friends, running errands, whatever it may be, and all of a sudden you see baby fish you weren't ready for. What do? Hello everyone, this is Bentley, and today we're going to go over a little story and the results of that, which is to say, the short version of the story. Recently, Cousin Henry, the one of Petco Horror Stories fame, called me up and said, "Hey Bentley, I got a bunch of baby fish from my convict cichlids. What do I do?" I don't know if this ever happened to you, but I've had this in the past where I've had surprise clutches of eggs, or maybe just baby fish I wasn't necessarily expecting, and had to kind of make some adjustments to my tank. So that is what we're going to talk about. I went over to Cousin Henry's house, I looked at his tank, I looked at his setup, I looked at what the fish were doing and their behavior, and gave some advice. First piece of advice, food. Let's say you're normally feeding a pellet food like this stuff here. This is some extreme nice, but whatever, any kind of pellet food. Well, teeny tiny baby fish mouths don't do very good with pellet food. So the first thing you want to do, food. The easiest option is to go out and buy stuff like this. Flake. Doesn't have to be extreme, but I've got both the krill and the spirulina, so a little more veg heavy, a little more protein heavy. Depending on the type of fish you have, you might change. But the reason why we choose flake over pellets is because it's very easy to just in your hands very finely grind up to get it as powdery and small as possible so that it's easier for our baby fish to eat. Like I said, doesn't have to be these brands, doesn't have to be this specific food. Just find a good flake food that you trust if you don't have one, and make it so you can powder it up real easy. You might have teeny tiny baby fish, and that's where something like this comes into play. This is Ceramicron. And micron is, as it says, micro. This particular food is between 5 and 50 microns in size. Basically, if we were to look in here, right, we just open my thing up, you can see it is a very fine powder, right? Now, foods like this are great for your small tetras, your rainbow fish, anything where the babies are super tiny. A little bit of this goes a long way, and especially for fish that small, you'll want to be feeding multiple times a day. Upwards of 6 potentially. It depends on the fish. In the case of like me, who does rainbow fish, when I have baby fish, I need to be feeding them at least 4 times a day for the first month. So tiny foods like this matter because you're just putting a very small amount. You could do something like a paintbrush or whatever to get a teeny tiny amount. Just put a little dusting on the top of the water. Do that multiple times a day to make sure those fish are continuously eating throughout the day. Food is number one when it comes to fish survival, from teeny tiny fry to getting them to where they're a little more robust in size and easier to take care of. Number two, I want to talk about the water movement in your tank. If you have particularly small fry, you probably need to make sure that the flow in your tank is a lot lower. So if you're using something like a powered filter, hang on the back of cast or something like that, if it has adjustable flow, start adjusting that flow as down as far as you can. Try to get it to like the lowest possible setting. And on the inputs, consider something like this. This is an intake sponge. Easy peasy, right? It just goes over the intake. It will restrict the flow just a tiny amount, but more importantly, it creates a physical barrier to prevent our little baby fish from potentially going up into the flow. Now, certain fish, larger fish naturally, like some of your cichlids, convict cichlids in the case of Cousin Henry, they stay pretty safe and they're kept really well by their parents, so you might not need to go to this level with those type of fish, but for more gentle or small fish, definitely consider intake sponge to block it and bring the flow down as low as possible. If you can transition to sponge filtration or some other air-driven filtration, that's going to maximize your chance of keeping those babies for a long period of time. Number 3, remove threats from the tank. If you got Siamese algae eaters, a pleco, some larger fish that have just been in there in a community, like maybe some angelfish or some other cichlids, get them out. If you're trying to protect these baby fish, you're going to need to move those fish to a different tank or find a way to move the babies. The babies is a lot harder. They're very fragile, so this is why I say try to move the other adult fish out of the tank and protect those babies until they get to a size to where you can more easily move them and raise them in a separate tank, and then you can move your larger fish back into your community if this happens to be the oops babies in a community tank. Finally, my last piece of advice to you as a quick, short, and easy way. I mean, we could go in depth with larger breeding tutorials. There are plenty of them out there. This is a kind of like, oh no, emergency situation, right? Make sure that when you do your water changes, you don't have big spikes in temperature. Try to keep your water as close to the temperature as it is in the tank right now when you're bringing fresh water in. There are a number of species that can be extremely fragile to shifts in temperature. So when you do your water change and you're doing your maintenance work, be a little extra cautious and make sure that water is coming in within as close as possible to the same temperature as possible for that tank. So if you know your tank says it's at 74 degrees, verify that with a thermometer. Use a temp gun, whatever tool you have. Verify that temperature and then temp the same water that you're getting ready to water change with to make sure that it's coming in as close as you can. Within a degree is usually fine. You don't have to be like perfect by the 0.1 degree, okay? Get it as close as possible. This is a way that we make sure that there's no shock getting introduced to some of our baby fish and just playing it as safe as possible. Okay, I lied. There's one more tip. All of a sudden, you're gonna have a lot of extra mouths, which means you're gonna need a lot of extra food, but in tiny, tiny amounts, right? If these are the only fish in that tank and all of a sudden you've got a big uptake in the amount of extra food you're feeding, make sure that you're really on top of your filter maintenance. You might want to maintain your filter right away. Do a good cleaning as soon as you see those oops babies and you get the other things in place. Do a good cleaning because you're going to have some extra particulates. You might see a little spike, some kind of bloom, bacterial bloom in the water. Don't panic about those things so much. The system will balance itself pretty fast. Just be aware that you're going to have a sudden spike in the amount of food you're feeding, so there's going to be a difference in nutrients. So make sure that you're taking appropriate precautions. That might include extra oxygenation. Just add an air stone to help out around the tank, just to be as safe as possible to make sure that what we're doing will give us the best chance of success in getting those baby fish to a size where they're more stable, and potentially we get to enjoy lots of new baby fish, or maybe even look to sell them and start thinking about breeding for profit. That's it. That's a quick tip, a little bit of a story with Cousin Henry. For Cousin Henry's case, I gave him a thing of the krill flake because he normally feeds a different type of flake. I wanted to have plenty of food. I actually gave him a container this size because he's feeding convict cichlids. And that was almost it. We kind of looked at how the tank was arranged. We had removed some of the other fish from the tank, so it was basically just the convict parents. There's this big kind of artificial rock shelter that he has, and the parents are doing a great job of corralling the babies away from the flow of the tank, keeping them safe and protected. And after watching their behavior for several hours, I mean, I was at Cousin Henry's house for, I think, 4 hours while we were talking, and I was kind of constantly watching the tank. I have a little bit of footage that you will have seen. I felt pretty safe. I really just felt the biggest thing was make sure he's got plenty of food and knows, like, hey, grind that stuff just as fine as possible. The water flow in the tank naturally will move it around the tank and make it available to the babies, but that's going to make sure our babies have plenty to eat. And we've removed any of the other threats. There was a goldfish and a pleco in there. The pleco probably will stay, because honestly, like, he knows don't go back there, but he knows if he has to, he can move the pleco. But that's one of those things where we're not too stressed because it's not something convicts can't handle, but some of the other fish that were in there potentially could have been a threat. So we removed those, had them moved to a different tank that he had in his house with a turtle, called it good. So if you enjoy videos like this, quick tips fueled by a story, let me know in the comments down below. Give it a little like, maybe share it with a friend. All those things are the easiest way for you to help small YouTubers like myself do better on YouTube. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and stay awesome.